Everyone feared the vampire, but no one ever asked what kind of loneliness could survive 600 years. Rain poured over the city in silver sheets, turning quiet streets into rivers of reflected lights. Most people hurried home before sunset, locking their doors the moment the sky turned dark. Old stories still lingered in whispered conversations, warning children never to wander after dusk because something ancient walked beneath the night. His name had changed with every century, but the fear remained the same. Lucian Ashcroft ruled an empire hidden in plain sight, a kingdom built beneath glass towers and marble skylines. Investors admired his brilliance. Politicians respected his influence. Ordinary people only knew the rumors. They spoke of impossible wealth, unnatural calm, and eyes so cold they seemed untouched by time itself. No one ever stayed close enough to learn whether any of those stories were true. They simply feared him, and fear had become the only companion that never abandoned him. Every evening followed the same rhythm. Meetings ended. Chauffeurs waited. Security teams surrounded him without being asked. Employees lowered their eyes as he passed through the towering lobby. Lucian noticed every heartbeat, every nervous breath, every hurried step, yet none of it reached him anymore. After centuries of watching civilizations rise and disappear, people had become passing shadows drifting through endless nights. Then, on one rainy Thursday, everything changed because of someone who had absolutely no reason to matter. Emma Carter adjusted the hood of her faded jacket as she stepped out of a neighborhood diner after finishing a double shift. Her paycheck barely covered rent for the tiny apartment she shared with silence and determination. The soles of her sneakers were beginning to separate, and the umbrella she carried leaned slightly to one side after surviving too many storms. She checked her phone. $10 left until payday. Enough for groceries if she skipped coffee. She smiled anyway. It wasn't because life was easy. It was because she refused to let difficult days decide who she would become. As she crossed a quiet side street, a soft whimper stopped her. Beneath a bus stop bench, a soaked golden retriever puppy shivered beside a cardboard box that had already collapsed under the rain. Emma crouched without hesitation. "Hey there," she whispered gently. "Looks like both of us picked the wrong night to be outside." She slipped off her only dry scarf and carefully wrapped it around the trembling puppy before shielding it with her umbrella. Cars passed without slowing. Strangers hurried by pretending not to notice. Emma remained exactly where she was, her knees soaked by cold water, softly humming an old song her grandmother used to sing whenever storms frightened her as a little girl. Across the street, a black luxury sedan rolled silently to a stop. Security guards prepared to open the rear door, but Lucian raised one finger. They froze instantly. His crimson eyes rested on the young woman kneeling in the rain. She had no cameras pointed at her. No audience waiting to applaud. No reason to sacrifice her comfort for an abandoned animal she would probably never see again after tonight. Yet she stayed. For reasons Lucian himself could not explain, 6 centuries of practiced indifference cracked with the quiet sound of one simple act of kindness. For the first time in longer than anyone alive could remember, the Vampire King forgot where he was going. Lucian remained inside the motionless sedan long after the traffic light had changed twice. His driver glanced into the rearview mirror, waiting for the familiar command to continue, but none came. The guards exchanged silent looks. Their king had never delayed a schedule for anything, let alone to watch an ordinary human shelter a frightened puppy from the rain. Every passing second felt impossible. Finally, Emma lifted the little dog into her arms, carefully tucked it beneath her jacket, and hurried toward the glowing sign of a 24-hour veterinary clinic across the street. Only after the glass door closed behind her did Lucian quietly speak. "Find out if the animal survives." The sentence stunned everyone inside the vehicle. It was not a business order. It was not a security concern. It was a simple request born from curiosity, something none of them had heard from him in decades. The sedan slipped away without a sound, disappearing into the wet streets while Emma never realized she had been watched. Inside the clinic, she counted the bills in her wallet with trembling fingers. The receptionist smiled kindly after explaining the examination fee. Emma looked down at the puppy sleeping peacefully against her jacket. She could still buy groceries tomorrow if she skipped lunch for the rest of the week. It was not a difficult decision. "Please help him," she said softly as she handed over every dollar she had left. "I will figure everything else out later." 2 technicians carried the puppy toward the treatment room while Emma settled into a worn plastic chair beside the window. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware that she had given away both her scarf and her last bit of money on the same rainy night. Still, a small smile appeared on her face. Somehow, knowing the little dog was warm made the cold easier to ignore. Nearly 30 minutes later, an elderly veterinarian returned with gentle eyes and encouraging news. The puppy had been dehydrated but otherwise healthy. Someone had abandoned him only hours earlier. Emma exhaled so deeply it almost became a laugh. "Can I visit him tomorrow?" she asked. "Of course," the veterinarian replied. "Unless you would like to take him home." Emma hesitated for only a heartbeat before quietly admitting, "My apartment does not allow pets, and I can barely afford my own rent." She reached through the kennel door to scratch behind the puppy's ears. "You deserve better than my tiny place, buddy." The puppy answered with a happy wag of his tail, completely unaware that the woman beside him had just sacrificed her entire grocery budget to save his life. Several miles away, Lucian stood alone in the highest office of Ashcroft Tower, looking over a city glittering beneath fresh rain. One of his oldest advisors entered without making a sound. "My king," the silver-haired vampire said carefully, "the animal is expected to recover." The young woman paid every dollar she carried. She refused any recognition before leaving. Lucian did not answer immediately. Instead, he stared at the reflection in the glass. A face untouched by age. Eyes that had witnessed empires vanish. A life so long that memories had become heavier than mountains. Then, almost to himself, he asked a question that no one in the room had expected. Why would someone with so little still choose to give everything? His advisor searched for an answer but found none. Outside, the rain finally stopped, and somewhere beneath the clearing sky, Emma walked home carrying nothing except an empty wallet, wet shoes, and a heart that somehow felt lighter than it had that morning. The following afternoon arrived wrapped in bright autumn sunlight, making it difficult to believe the previous night's storm had ever happened. Emma finished her breakfast with nothing more than a piece of toast and a glass of tap water before catching the city bus to the diner. She greeted every customer with the same warm smile, even when her stomach quietly reminded her that she had skipped another proper meal. Around noon, the restaurant manager asked her to deliver lunch to Ashcroft Tower after one of the regular delivery drivers called in sick. Emma accepted immediately. Extra deliveries usually meant extra tips, and extra tips meant groceries. 20 minutes later she stepped through the revolving glass doors of the tallest building downtown, balancing 2 insulated bags while staring up at a ceiling so high it almost disappeared into the sunlight. Everything inside gleamed with polished marble, brushed steel, and quiet elegance. People moved with purpose, speaking softly into headsets and carrying expensive briefcases. Emma suddenly felt very aware of her inexpensive sneakers and faded uniform, but she reminded herself that everyone deserved kindness, no matter where they worked. At the reception desk, she smiled. "Delivery for the executive conference room." The receptionist checked a tablet before nodding politely. 45th floor. "Someone will meet you." Moments later the elevator doors opened with barely a whisper. Emma stepped inside beside a tall man wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His silver hair reflected the afternoon light, and although his expression remained calm, there was something strangely disciplined about the way he stood. "Going up?" Emma asked with an easy smile. The man looked at her for a moment before giving a slight nod. Indeed. Neither of them spoke again during the ride. When the elevator reached the executive floor, Emma thanked him with a cheerful wave before following the hallway signs toward the conference room. She never noticed that the employees passing by lowered their heads the moment the silver-haired gentleman appeared. Inside the conference room, she arranged the lunch trays while executives continued discussing numbers she barely understood. No one paid much attention to the young waitress except one person standing quietly behind the glass wall overlooking the city. Lucian watched every movement through the transparent panels separating his private office from the conference space. She laughed gently after helping an assistant pick up a folder that had slipped from his hands. She straightened a chair someone had accidentally left out of place. Before leaving, she noticed one of the potted plants near the window had tipped slightly to one side, so she paused long enough to straighten it before quietly heading for the door. Nothing she did was dramatic. Nothing demanded recognition. Every small action seemed as natural as breathing. Lucian found himself watching until the elevator doors closed behind her. His advisor entered a moment later carrying several documents awaiting signature. "The board is ready, my king." Lucian did not reach for the papers. Instead, he asked, who was the woman delivering lunch? The advisor blinked. Emma Carter. Part-time waitress. 2 additional jobs. No criminal record. No unusual history. Excellent references. Lives alone in a small apartment on Maple Street. Lucian remained silent. Ordinary. Every report described her as ordinary. Yet nothing about the quiet peace that followed her presence felt ordinary to him. Across town, Emma finished her shift and smiled when her phone rang. The veterinary clinic had found a permanent family willing to adopt the puppy she rescued. She stopped walking in the middle of the sidewalk and laughed with genuine relief. "That is the best news I have heard all week," she said before thanking the veterinarian 3 separate times. High above the city, Lucian stood beside his office window once again, unknowingly watching the same street where Emma ended the call with tears of happiness shining in her eyes. He could not hear her words from that distance, but somehow her smile reached him anyway, and for reasons that defied 600 years of certainty, he found himself smiling back. The change was so small that no human would have noticed it, but among vampires even the quietest difference echoed like thunder. Lucian no longer dismissed the morning sunlight filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ashcroft Tower. He no longer ended meetings the instant the final report was delivered. More surprising still, he began asking questions that had nothing to do with markets, investments, or security. "How many employees work 2 jobs?" he asked one afternoon. The executives around the conference table exchanged puzzled glances before the human resources director carefully answered. "Nearly 14%, sir." Lucian nodded once without another word, but the question alone traveled through the building faster than any official announcement. The ancient ruler who had spent centuries focusing only on efficiency had suddenly become curious about ordinary lives. Down in the diner, Emma continued living exactly as she always had. She never imagined that anyone powerful even knew her name. Between pouring coffee and clearing tables, she chatted with elderly regulars, helped a young father carry a stroller through the entrance, and quietly slipped an extra dinner roll into the takeout bag of an exhausted construction worker after noticing him counting coins at the register. She never expected thanks. She simply believed small kindnesses made difficult days a little easier. Late that evening, Ashcroft Tower hosted a charity reception for several local organizations. The diner received another catering request, and Emma once again found herself carrying trays through the elegant lobby. This time, however, the atmosphere felt different. Employees moved more carefully than before, almost as if preparing for someone important to arrive. The silver-haired gentleman she had met in the elevator greeted her with a respectful nod. "Welcome back, Miss Carter." Emma smiled with pleasant surprise. "You remembered my name." The man allowed himself the faintest smile. "Some people are difficult to forget." Before Emma could respond, another employee accidentally dropped a box filled with printed programs. hundreds of pages scattered across the polished floor. Several guests glanced toward the mess before continuing their conversations. Emma immediately knelt beside the young employee and began gathering the papers. "Do not worry," she said warmly. "We will finish before anyone notices." Together they stacked every page back into neat piles. The employee looked ready to cry from relief. "Thank you. I thought I had ruined everything." Emma simply smiled. Everybody has difficult days. From the balcony above, Lucian watched the entire exchange without speaking. He had witnessed kings negotiate peace, watched explorers discover continents, and seen fortunes built overnight. Yet somehow the image of a tired waitress comforting a frightened employee held his attention more completely than any historical event ever had. His oldest advisor quietly stepped beside him. "My king," he said carefully, "the council has begun asking questions." Lucian did not look away from the ballroom below. "About what?" "About her." Silence settled between them. Music drifted softly through the hall while guests laughed beneath crystal chandeliers. They believe her repeated presence cannot be coincidence. Lucian finally turned toward the advisor, his expression calm but unreadable. "Perhaps coincidence has simply become unfamiliar." The advisor lowered his eyes. He had served 3 generations of vampire rulers, yet he had never heard an answer like that. Meanwhile, Emma finished helping the employee before picking up her serving tray and continuing through the ballroom exactly as if nothing unusual had happened. She still did not know the name of the quiet man watching from above. She did not know that every member of his private security team had noticed the subtle change in his expression whenever she entered a room. Most astonishing of all, she did not know that for the first time in 6 centuries, the immortal ruler who had forgotten what hope felt like had begun looking forward to tomorrow. The questions began quietly, hidden behind polished smiles and carefully chosen words, but in Lucian's world even whispers carried weight. Deep beneath the city, inside a chamber carved from ancient black stone long before the first skyscraper touched the sky, the vampire council gathered beneath towering arches illuminated by soft golden flames. 12 elders sat around a circular table that had witnessed centuries of decisions shaping both the hidden vampire society and the human world above. They had watched kings rise and nations fall without surprise. Yet today their attention rested on something far more unexpected. An ordinary young woman named Emma Carter. One elder folded his hands calmly. "She has appeared near His Majesty 4 times in less than a week." Another answered, "Coincidences exist." A third slowly shook her head. "Not around Lucian Ashcroft. Not after 600 years of perfect routine." Silence settled across the chamber. They possessed no evidence of danger, no prophecy mentioning Emma's name, and no sign that she carried unusual power. Their concern came from something much simpler. Change. The immortal king had never changed for anyone. Meanwhile, Emma finished another long shift at the diner before stopping at the veterinary clinic to visit the golden retriever puppy she had rescued. The little dog raced toward the kennel door the moment he recognized her voice, wagging his tail so enthusiastically that everyone in the waiting room laughed. The veterinarian smiled as Emma knelt beside him. "His new family is picking him up tomorrow morning." Emma gently scratched behind his ears. "That makes me happier than you know." The veterinarian studied her for a moment before asking, "Would you like a picture with him before he leaves?" Emma laughed softly. "I would love that." A receptionist used Emma's phone to capture the moment. The puppy leaned happily against her shoulder while Emma smiled with genuine joy. It was a simple photograph, ordinary in every possible way, yet it captured something rare that could never be staged. A heart that expected nothing in return. Across town, Lucian concluded another board meeting when his silver-haired advisor quietly entered carrying a single envelope. "My king, our community outreach office received this from the veterinary clinic after today's charity partnership event. They are requesting permission to feature the rescue story on the company website because the clinic receives funding through Ashcroft Foundation grants." Lucian opened the envelope. Inside rested the photograph of Emma holding the puppy beneath bright afternoon sunlight. No expensive clothing. No carefully prepared pose. Just effortless kindness shining through a smile untouched by ambition. Lucian looked at the image longer than anyone expected. "Approve the request," he said quietly. "And double the Foundation's annual support for the clinic." The advisor nodded before hesitating. "May I ask why?" Lucian returned the photograph to its envelope with remarkable care. "Because places that protect hope deserve to remain open." Later that evening, the decision spread through the hidden vampire community. Another unexpected act. Another unexplained change. The elders grew increasingly uneasy. One finally spoke the concern none of them wished to admit aloud. If the king begins allowing emotion to guide his judgment, every rival house will see opportunity. Another elder answered more thoughtfully. "Or perhaps we have forgotten that wisdom without compassion eventually becomes another form of blindness." Their debate continued long into the night while Emma walked home beneath quiet stars, unaware that the picture resting in her phone had already begun changing conversations inside a kingdom she did not know existed. She paused at a neighborhood bakery just before closing, using the last few dollars from her tips to buy 2 fresh muffins. One was for tomorrow's breakfast. The other she quietly handed to an elderly man sitting alone outside the bus station. "You look like you could use something warm," she said with an easy smile before continuing on her way without waiting for thanks. High above the sleeping city, Lucian stood beside his window once more, unaware that at almost the exact same moment, he and Emma were both looking at the same bright moon, each carrying a quiet question that tomorrow might finally begin to answer. The city welcomed another quiet morning, but beneath its calm surface invisible currents had already begun to shift. Emma started her day before sunrise, tying her apron behind her back as the familiar scent of fresh coffee filled the diner. She greeted every customer by name whenever she could remember it, laughed with the regulars who always ordered the same breakfast, and thanked the delivery driver who carried in heavy boxes before insisting he take a complimentary cup of coffee for the road. Nothing about her routine felt extraordinary. She simply moved through each hour believing that kindness was never wasted, even when nobody seemed to notice. What Emma could not see was that someone had begun noticing every small choice she made. High above the streets, Lucian stood inside his office while the first rays of sunlight reflected across the glass skyline. His advisor entered carrying a tablet filled with reports that normally demanded immediate attention. Instead of reaching for the business summaries, Lucian quietly asked a different question. "Does Miss Carter always begin work before dawn?" The advisor glanced at the schedule. "Yes, my king. She has not arrived late once in the past 3 years." Lucian nodded thoughtfully. "And after this shift?" "She tutors children at the community center 3 evenings each week before returning to the diner for weekend hours." Another silence settled between them. 600 years had taught Lucian that power often revealed character, yet this young woman possessed almost no power at all. Even so, every report described generosity instead of bitterness, patience instead of resentment, hope instead of complaint. He found himself wondering whether true strength had been standing in front of him all along, disguised as ordinary goodness. Later that afternoon, Emma finished her shift and walked several blocks to the neighborhood community center carrying a backpack filled with borrowed library books. A small classroom slowly filled with children eager to practice reading and finish homework before their parents returned from work. Emma celebrated every correct answer with genuine excitement, making each child feel as though they had accomplished something remarkable. One little boy struggled through an entire page before looking up nervously. "I am not very good at this." Emma smiled warmly and placed the book back in front of him. "You are better today than you were yesterday." That is how every great story begins. The boy straightened his shoulders and tried again. From a parked vehicle across the street, Lucian watched through the window without entering the building. He had intended only to confirm the information in the reports, yet he remained there for nearly an hour, listening to laughter drifting through the open windows. There was no performance. No expectation of reward. Emma encouraged every child exactly the same way she had comforted strangers, rescued an abandoned puppy, and helped frightened employees. She treated every person as though they mattered. As evening settled over the neighborhood, the children hurried home carrying books beneath their arms. Emma locked the classroom before stepping outside with a tired but peaceful smile. She never noticed the elegant black sedan quietly pulling away from the curb. Back beneath the city, the Vampire Council gathered once again. One elder placed several photographs on the ancient stone table. Emma teaching children. Emma leaving the veterinary clinic. Emma helping strangers. "We have investigated every part of her life," he announced. "There is no hidden agenda." Another elder frowned. "Then why does His Majesty continue watching her?" No one answered immediately. Finally, the oldest member of the council spoke with quiet certainty. "Because after centuries surrounded by fear, he has finally encountered someone who sees the world through compassion instead of caution." The chamber fell silent. Above them, the city lights flickered to life one by one. Emma walked home beneath the evening sky believing she had experienced another completely ordinary day, never realizing that every quiet step she took was slowly changing the heart of the most powerful being hidden within the world. Morning fog drifted between the downtown buildings as though the city itself was holding its breath. Emma hurried toward the diner carrying a paper bag with a homemade sandwich, smiling at the familiar crossing guard who waved every weekday without fail. The world around her felt comfortably predictable, yet unseen eyes followed her every step. Hidden beneath the streets, the Vampire Council had reached a quiet conclusion. If the mysterious change in their king continued, they needed to understand the woman responsible for it. Their oldest rule was simple. Observe first. Judge later. They would not interfere, but they would watch. Above ground, Lucian sat alone inside a private conference room after dismissing every executive from the morning meeting 10 minutes early. His advisors noticed another impossible change. The king who once demanded absolute precision now paused to ask whether the cafeteria staff had received the recent bonus approved through the Ashcroft Foundation. He requested updates on employee scholarship programs, community grants, and neighborhood education projects instead of quarterly profits. None of those questions weakened his authority. If anything, they made his presence even more difficult to understand. When one advisor cautiously mentioned that these decisions resembled Emma Carter's own habits of helping others, Lucian remained silent for several moments before answering. Perhaps compassion is not a distraction from leadership. Perhaps it is the part that survives the longest. Those words echoed through everyone who heard them. That afternoon Emma finished work early enough to stop by the public library before tutoring. She returned several borrowed novels and wandered through the used bookshelf searching for inexpensive stories to share with her students. An elderly volunteer accidentally dropped an entire stack of donated books while organizing the display. Before anyone else reacted, Emma was already kneeling beside her, carefully gathering every book and brushing dust from their covers. "Please do not worry," Emma said with an encouraging smile. "Books have survived much worse than falling a few feet." The volunteer laughed warmly. "Young lady, you always seem to arrive exactly when someone needs an extra pair of hands." Emma shrugged with quiet humility. "Someone has done the same for me more times than I can count." She never noticed the elegant man standing several aisles away pretending to examine a history section. Lucian had entered the library without security for the first time in centuries, curious to see whether kindness truly followed Emma everywhere she went or whether chance had simply favored the moments he witnessed. Within minutes he found his answer. No cameras surrounded her. No audience applauded. She simply noticed people others overlooked. As Emma checked out her books, the librarian handed her a small envelope. "A donor paid your library membership renewal for the next 5 years," she explained. Emma looked genuinely confused. There must be some mistake. The librarian smiled. The donor wished to remain anonymous. Emma held the envelope thoughtfully before whispering, "Then I hope whoever they are knows they made someone very happy today." She left carrying nothing more than borrowed books and quiet gratitude. From across the street, Lucian watched her disappear into the afternoon crowd. He had made the anonymous donation only hours earlier, expecting nothing in return, yet hearing her sincere appreciation stirred something inside him that centuries of wealth and influence never had. Far below the city, the council received another report describing the king's anonymous generosity. The oldest elder slowly closed the file and looked around the ancient chamber. "We feared that the human girl might change our king," he said softly. "Perhaps the greater miracle is that she is reminding him of the man he was before the world learned to fear him." The days passed with quiet consistency, yet something invisible had begun connecting two lives that still seemed worlds apart. Emma never questioned why little moments of unexpected kindness kept appearing around her. A scholarship donation suddenly expanded the community center where she volunteered. The neighborhood veterinary clinic received new equipment that allowed more abandoned animals to find homes. The public library announced longer evening hours after receiving an anonymous grant. Each time someone celebrated the good news, Emma smiled and thanked the unknown donors, believing that generous people still existed everywhere if someone simply looked closely enough. She never imagined that many of those quiet blessings traced back to a single decision made high above the city. Lucian no longer viewed compassion as an interesting curiosity. He had begun practicing it in silence, never attaching his name to the changes he made. His advisors noticed that every anonymous gift somehow reflected something Emma had once cared about. Animal shelters, schools, libraries, community programs. None of the donations sought recognition. They simply solved problems before anyone knew help had arrived. One evening his oldest advisor finally asked the question that had lingered for weeks. "My king, why do you insist on remaining invisible?" Lucian looked toward the skyline where thousands of lights stretched into the distance. "Because kindness loses something the moment it begins asking to be admired." The advisor lowered his head respectfully. Those words did not sound like the ruler who had once believed distance was the safest form of leadership. They sounded like someone rediscovering a truth forgotten centuries earlier. That same evening Emma finished tutoring and walked toward the subway station carrying a stack of well-worn books beneath one arm. Outside the entrance she noticed a young college student sitting on a bench with tears quietly running down her face beside a broken bicycle. Emma slowed her steps without hesitation. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. The student explained that she had missed an important interview after her bicycle chain snapped and now had no money for repairs or a ride home. Emma listened without interrupting before reaching into her purse. Inside was the small amount she had planned to use for groceries the following morning. She looked at the folded bills for only a second before placing them into the student's hand. "Take a taxi," Emma said with an encouraging smile. "You can worry about everything else tomorrow." The young woman stared at her in disbelief. "I cannot accept this." Emma laughed softly. "One day you will help someone else. Then we will call it even." Across the street, hidden among evening pedestrians, Lucian witnessed every word. He had followed from a respectful distance only because he wanted to ensure she arrived home safely after volunteering so late. Instead he found himself watching Emma repeat the same quiet generosity that had first captured his attention in the rain. She still believed goodness should travel forward from one person to another without expecting repayment. For the first time in hundreds of years, Lucian understood that immortality was not measured only by centuries lived. Sometimes it was measured by the kindness that continued long after one simple decision inspired another. As Emma disappeared into the subway station, Lucian remained standing beneath the city lights, his ancient heart filled with an unfamiliar sense of peace. Deep beneath the streets, however, the Vampire Council received one final report before ending the night's gathering. The oldest elder slowly closed the parchment and spoke with calm certainty. She has changed nothing about who she is. It is our king who has chosen to become someone the world has not seen in 600 years. Around the ancient chamber no one argued, because for the first time every member understood that the greatest transformation had never belonged to the young woman at all. It belonged to the immortal ruler who had finally remembered that even endless power could never replace the quiet strength of a compassionate heart. Several weeks later, the city felt different in ways most people could not explain. New scholarships quietly opened doors for students who had nearly given up on college. Animal shelters reported record numbers of successful adoptions. Community centers extended their evening programs. Libraries welcomed families later into the night. Newspapers praised an anonymous wave of generosity that seemed to spread from one neighborhood to the next, and although no one knew its true beginning, countless lives had already been touched by it. Emma never once imagined she had played any part in those changes. She continued serving coffee before sunrise, tutoring children after work, and greeting strangers with the same sincere smile she had offered on the rainy night that unknowingly altered another life forever. To her, kindness was never a grand gesture. It was simply a choice repeated often enough to become a way of living. One crisp autumn evening, after leaving the community center, Emma stopped at the small park where colorful leaves drifted across quiet walking paths. She sat on a wooden bench for a moment, enjoying the peaceful air before heading home. A familiar voice interrupted the silence. "May I sit here?" She looked up and recognized the elegant man she had met several times inside Ashcroft Tower. "Of course," she answered with an easy smile. "There is plenty of room." Lucian took the seat beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. For a few moments neither of them spoke. They simply watched children laughing in the distance while the setting sun painted the sky with shades of gold and amber. Finally Emma smiled toward him. "You always seem very busy when I see you." Lucian allowed the faintest smile to appear. "Lately I have been trying to make time for more important things." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "That is harder than most people realize." He turned toward her. "And what would you consider important?" Emma looked across the park before answering. "Helping someone feel less alone. Even if it is only for a few minutes." Most people remember kindness much longer than success. Her words settled gently into the quiet evening. Lucian had listened to emperors, scholars, and world leaders over 6 centuries, yet no speech had ever carried more truth than that simple sentence spoken by a waitress who believed she was completely ordinary. He wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to explain who he truly was, the hidden kingdom beneath the city, and the impossible length of the road that had led him to this bench. Instead he simply said, "Thank you." Emma laughed softly. "For what?" Lucian looked toward the fading sunlight. "For reminding someone that there is still goodness in the world." She smiled without understanding the full meaning behind his words. "I think it was always there. Sometimes people just need someone willing to notice it first." As twilight settled over the park, they stood and walked toward the sidewalk together before reaching the corner where their paths separated. Emma waved cheerfully before disappearing into the evening crowd, never realizing she had just changed the course of an immortal life without ever seeking power, recognition, or reward. Lucian remained standing until she vanished from sight. High above the skyline, the first stars quietly appeared, while deep beneath the city the vampire council watched through ancient mirrors without speaking. At last the oldest elder closed the viewing chamber and smiled for the first time in many decades. "The greatest rulers are not remembered because others feared them," he said quietly. "They are remembered because they learned when to open their hearts." And somewhere beyond the noise of the endless city, hope continued moving from one stranger to another, proving that even the coldest soul could discover warmth when it finally encountered genuine kindness.